Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Cymelle and I will be discussing declaration and the interpretation of performance and performativity. Hi, I'm Cymelle Edwards. Thank you for having me, and I will be reading my critical essay on declaration and interpretation of performance and performativity, specifically Black performance and performativity. I would like to share my screen with you. Black is to performance as Blackness is to performativity. We know that Black is built by preconceived powers of political and social economies, yet the circumstances multiply or diffuse the instant that they create a distinct entity that we want to delineate as Black. But Blackness is the in-vention, the process of expressing emotions in new and meaningful ways left to interpretation of the past. Both performance and performativity operate as these interpretations. This may be a lie or an unbelonging truth because it exists in unfamiliar history, the past which returns to with uncanny vividness in the changed context of the present. This context, though permitting change, is deeply rooted and materializes in the act of theater and performance. One way to begin this conversation would be to look closely at volume in the series Theater Theory Text Performance titled Dark Matter, written by Professor of English at Boston College, Andrew Sofer, which explores invisibility in drama, theater, and performance. In this mapping of such dimensions, dark matter becomes analogous with magic, hallucination, and escaping sight on the stage. It does not, however, begin its exploration with the phenomenological analysis of the Black performance. To do so would be to exploit the volatility of one's Black body. In the section titled Traumatic Empathy, Anna DeVere Smith, we learn of community selection. Smith, a self-described African-American performance artist and playwright, documents traumatized communities in their own words. Smith selects based on silence, silenced by the dominant culture, media coverage, and American mythography. For Smith, performance is a constant state of becoming. Sofer writes that although she does not say so explicitly, in performance, Smith's body, marked by gender, class, and race, yet through theatrical alchemy, able to inhabit differently marked bodies, wants to become America, a container for others' experiences. By mirroring others' experience, Smith allows trauma to speak through her. The performer becomes at once verbatim documentarian and speaking ghost, bringing history into the now. And again, for Smith, performance is a constant state of becoming. So at once we have silence, community, ghost, and performance. What Smith renders on the stage is discursive performativity, an elusive fabric of what must be made visible. Here I want to address how Smith's uncanny performativity is successful due to this audience's lack of specter. Not every being can be spectral, and not every performance can be spectated. By performing the experiences of others, Smith makes a case for the trauma of Black bodies and always becoming, because hers is the only ghost in the room. This is where the two, performance and performativity, coalesce and bring into being interpretation of the past, a key operation in allowing the body to exchange preconceived power for inherited grief. When a marked woman speaks, the intent is to listen. What happens instead is a feast of locution, of lilts biting into speak, and the question that reemerges with every utterance: what is the meaning of this invention? Hortense J. Spillers writes in Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, an American grammar book, quote, "I am a marked woman. If I were not here, I would have to be invented." Here is where I would like to answer how invention is an iteration of Black performance. Diasporic expressivities are built through an unbelonging memory that stretches toward and grasps at a history unfamiliar to Black diaspora. In this way, performance is an attempt to reach the dark matter, the unseen, the unfamiliar. The hyphen here deploys a sense of taking and degradation, standing between two forces that the mouth so naturally wants to bring together. Toni Morrison reinforces this notion of invention, or maybe is the exigence of such, through the use of compound neologisms in her novel Beloved. A list of some repeated neologisms used throughout part one of Beloved: white girl, school teacher, colored people, white woman, white boy, rememory, white folks, breakneck. Here, then, is an opposition of binary meanings, according to Spillers. Spillers identifies the opposition of binary meaning through cultural motives which appear under the rule of dominance in regard to female or male gender. Yes, again, the binary. The same opposition exists in the cultural motives of the text, in which colored and people oppose the animal that makes an appearance throughout history. They oppose the Black body that conflates the argument on Black being the absence of color. This approach teaches us Morrison's performative move, but first we must ask, what is the meaning, the implication? The performance moves through in-vention, the process of expressing emotion in new and meaningful ways, left to interpretation of the past. This is seen in the compound Rememory. Some things go, pass on. Some things just stay. I used to think it was my rememory, you know. Some things you forget, others you never do. And that is a quote from Toni Morrison's Beloved. I cannot begin to discuss the now stage, which is the misprision of Hollywood squares, without first describing each cast member as shifting fragmentations of subject, at once hemorrhaging toward their confines and almost always seeming to be packing a large wound. We tender our identities in the first hour of table reads, in which I was the role of declaration in a play. We tender our identities in the first hour of table reads, trade government names for overdetermined nominative properties. That tender is also a vessel, boat or rail car or voice, gives permission to carry or proliferate this process of the naming ritual. The name I am given as my character in this play is Declaration. She is indeed a character and not merely a voice. Though she is never fully revealed physically, her voice conveys all the emotion of a woman, first reporting a sexual assault, progressing to someone finding their power by telling her story, or so insists the playwright. In this surreal assemblage of white faces on the unprimed canvas of polarized glass, I am a dense black shape of negative space with nebulous circumference, not unlike John Latham's Full Stop, in which the spot is forced into being by way of a gun. How is invention an iteration of Black performance? We must first win the loyalty of the public through cultural fiction, and this is what I mean by fragmentations of subject. The characters of this play are superimposed configurations of truth, my character, Declaration, being a specter of such. I would like to know how to tell this story without telling it because I am tired of reliving the nightmare. Cast members in jest, suggesting we all wear hoods to the audience talkback of a performance which renders the story of a young white woman who, quote, faced off against the deadliest terrorist organization the US has ever known, end quote, and where I, a Black woman, play the role of her dying declaration. I try to convince myself that because I am no longer uttering the narrative, it loses its power. But I look at my fingers as they construct this sentence, how they are pressing flesh to keys, doing the work my mouth is unwilling to do for itself. Each extremity is a violent tongue-licking code into a coherent message, and the spectrum of performance and performativity stretches in slight and polyphonic texture, under which we learn that flesh sunders the two in guise of the Black body. The nature of performance is situated in activity or forms of cultural staging, and how these function as a site for performativity or moves and operates in materiality. The question then becomes, how do we make visible the historically unseen Black body while simultaneously protecting it from being other? Perhaps we do not italicize other. Perhaps we do not protect ourselves from otherness, rather, we protect the flesh from subjectivity. We must get comfortable with simultaneity of standing between two forces. In a research-based epistolary to his grandmother published in Text and Performance Quarterly, E. Patrick Johnson proposes that the focus on performativity alone may problematically reduce performativity and performance to one interpretive frame to theorize human experience, while focusing on both may bring together two interpretive frames whose relationship is more dialogical and dialectical. In other words, to refrain from conflating performance and performativity, we must indulge a conversation that makes proper distinction. Black performance theory extends to the imagination, refutes its mythological properties while simultaneously engaging with magic. We generally expect the past to return with uncanny vividness in the changed context of the present. Imagination helps with this by being a forward-moving event, never receding, so that truth is unshifting in the now. Claudia Rankine mines the imagination in Citizen. Quote, because white men can't police their imagination, Black people are dying. And with regard to Serena Williams's penalty from the Grand Slam committee, quote, it could be because her body, trapped in a racial imaginary, trapped in disbelief, code for being Black in America, is being governed by a collapsed relationship that had promised to play by the rules. Jordan R. Young's Acting Solo discusses the art of one-person shows. Solo theater has a rich history of overcoming audience preconceptions, but we know that Black performance is never a solitary act. Young writes that one-person shows appear to be exclusively an American invention or conceit of the 20th century. He then states that this unique form of theater originated and flourished in England over 200 years ago, and I would like to asterisk this assertion. 200 years ago, perhaps, though unlikely, but not in Europe. It has worn the mask of and donned the names of solo drama, monodrama, solo performance, theoretical scaffold, and more. The Odyssey Saga is a well-known exemplar of African solo performance first brought into being as oral literature. The one-person play narrates the heroism of Odyssey who defends Iho of the Niger Delta in southern Nigeria. There is also the female-led solo performance and accounts describing a woman who switches into various characters and voices to tell a story of an ogress. In both performances, the performers are recalling mythology and narratives passed down, engaging with other characters, or utilizing voices. And this is what I mean by Black performance never being a solo act. There are always others' voices, voices which I describe as whipping and communication that offer fresh mediations of the act. If dark matter is the unseen of theater, then what is the unheard? Fellner's Apostles of Silence describes the visual genre of mime. The text generally consults French newspapers of the modern era in search of documentation which catalogs the literary medium, many of which are obtained from the Bibliothèque d'Arsenal in Paris in the section titled Mime and Art in Search of Definition. Fellner writes, it is difficult to mime, it is difficult to define mime, for what is denoted by the term is different for each generation. It is a genre whose source of expression lies in the mutable physical being, leaving little tangible evidence of its form and content. I had been cast in a silenced role, a woman who was to mime directions from a casting director unseen, offstage, speaking from a god mic. This woman was capable of speaking, the woman I auditioned for, but could not utter during the loquacious director's monologue. The body, then, had to speak for me. I write of this experience in another unpublished essay titled Silence Experiment, but it is important to discuss how, if briefly, to understand how Black performance theory can reach the unspoken performance, the performance where in the throat, even in calm and stillness, there is never emptiness. This role that I played was layered by objection, me, a Black woman, sporting a role written for and based off of a white woman in Edgar Wallace's King Kong. Learning the origins of my character was not as cathartic as I thought it might be. Rather, I had learned the origins of the starlet's Anne, a fraternal embodiment of my character's Anna. She is Anne Darrow, or a version of Darrow, the woman who falls in love with an ape. She is Anne Darrow, or a version of Anne Darrow, the woman who falls in love with an ape. I would rather learn the origins of this woman who falls in love with an ape. Unlike Declaration, right? My other character in the other play, too, was written for a white woman, though this is never fully addressed throughout rehearsals or during my one-on-one with the playwright. The performance becomes grounded in praxis, as E. Patrick Johnson insists it must. In this way, the practice of performance engages with performativity, the texture and tangibility of one's body, which cannot be distinguished through speech. So in 2019, there are only a few people remaining in the audience when I walk back into the theater and retrieve the skinny black binder that holds my script, right? What did it mean to get a part only to embody someone trying to get a part? What would I do with my mouth if not maintain a dialogue? I wouldn't need to contort my diaphragm from its natural dome-like shape or practice vocal exercises. I wouldn't need to excel a hiss or hum through a straw or relax my lips to deliver clear diction or slide an octave. Experts recommend stretching the tongue, sticking it out and pointing it up, bracing it from behind and pushing it against the teeth. None of these translated to the role I needed to play. I had to form a tableau to visualize my silence. Perhaps I could retreat as a Jesuit missionary like in Scorsese's Silence. I could be led through spiritual exercises and vow quietude like a companion of Jesus from conception to crucifixion. If anything, I could practice making inaudible the successfully audible ingenue. You're supposed to be able to go your entire life without having your wisdom teeth removed, right? These third molars are Darwinian, vestigial structures that corroborate evolution. I learned that mine were impacted, trapped beneath gum tissue, stuck in the jaw where bone and ligament begin to deteriorate. But this doesn't affect speech or speechlessness. Teeth are just little bones that, instead of breaking, thrown from the mouth like a tar picks over steel. By this time, I knew I would be auditioning for the showcase where I was Anna, but couldn't trust a casting crew I'd never met to recognize the diversity of my body, my Black body, that it could transubstantiate when read far enough. The body protects itself. Systems of centuries like membranes and vertebrae to protect the spine, how rib cage protects lung and heart, or the obvious, a skull to protect brain matter. The skin organ is an exposed boundary guarded only by speak, and when that is taken away, the system doesn't collapse like one might think. It builds insouciance and moves like oil down the scaly bark of a tree. An essay on the actor's body, written by a woman with Ehr's palsy, reminds me of Jerzy Kratowski's acting exercise of building technique by walking backwards on one's hands through a doorway. I imagine that one mouth excises into fifth limb. I know that I can walk on my hands, but walking on the tongue is tentative. We see two principal traits of Black performance theory in Rankine's work: policing the imagination and playing by the rules. Performance should be inherently rule-less and participating in whatever practices and ideologies it is exploring in the moment. It should gloriously converse with the luminous possibilities and impossibility of truth. In a white world, there are rules to performance, to Black performance, or there are implications held in the address from one white spectral to a Black apparition. These rules may include peaceful acknowledgement of the hail from a white savior or white antagonist, which sometimes present as savior, regulating zoning for single-family homes, restrictions on noise and labeling it as a nuisance, quote, bad behavior, the inability to safely walk from one part of town to another. Facing social constructs with tangible existence is a buttress for being Black. Looking further into Fellner's work, we learned that silence allows the performer to remain physically invulnerable. Although the mime's situations were realistic and representational, he, unlike his real-life counterpart, was capable of surviving everything nature or technological society can set against him. Train wrecks, explosions, cave-ins, waterfalls. He always emerged untouched, right, as a mime. Always emerged untouched. Through the lens of Black performance theory, a reconsideration of tangibility is necessary to discuss how corporeal renderings of silence align with phenomenological, wow, that I ran through that word, aspects of contemporary performativity, right? So though rooted in preconceived powers of political and social economies, BPT, Black performativity, Black performance theory, or Blackness is the invention. Therefore, silence in Black performance is an omission of sorts. The diaspora's inability to access their history calls for a negotiation of truth. There is subtle resistance of the past, of enslavement, and transmissions of grief. There is also an implied terror, an amalgamation of both truth and error. All of this takes place in the body. When I or my character Declaration or Anna laughs or screams on stage, it is silent, slow, guttural, repetitive, chained whimpers that keep the crowd attentive. Anna's is a death experiment I call cosmosis. Solvent thick systems of thought slip through time membranes, and this makes sense in dreams. This Byzantine to mute everything around her. She has been muting and muting well. The sound of laughter eclipses as she buries herself deeper into it, where involuntary contractions of specters, ranging from sedate giggles to boisterous gasps, unsettle her poise. She doesn't realize she is saturated with grief until her skin is crawling, submarining toward a deep foam blanket, chipping away at calcified cartilage, lifting the heavy clam's lid. She doesn't know what to do with all this air. She studies the science of babbles emanating from sable landscapes. These murmurs of sonic structures echo under wings and demarcate the stage. She entrusts the role with me, says, "Your turn." I trickle toward the center, locked into a stifled queue. Thank you.